Hello, it's the Liverpool Echoes Blood Red podcast. I'm Matt Addison with Paul Gorst, Keifer, MacDonald and Charlotte Coates all alongside me for today's show. Pre-season is, of course, just around the corner, and it's the first official day of Darwin Nunez, Fabio Carvalho and Carvalho Ramsay being Liverpool players. So we'll be assessing the summer window so far very shortly. We've also got some questions left over from the Q&A that we conducted last week that we shall come to and answer as well. Let's begin, though, with a look at where we're at this summer, Gorsty, not just in terms of transfers. Contracts we'll come to as well. But let's do the transfers first. It looks like, in terms of incomings, at least Liverpool are finished. But would you be content if that proves to be the case? Or do you have any sort of concerns with the squad at this stage?
No, I don't really. The only big question mark is whether Nunez can replicate what Mane's done last season. Liverpool need them to really to basically stay where they are. And that's a big ask because we know that Mane is undoubtedly one of the best players in European football, certainly for the, in this calendar year. He's been right up there with anyone else you care to name. So Liverpool need him to hit the ground running. They obviously are convinced that he can do that given the outlay on him. It's, it's not every day that Liverpool commit to 64 million up front. And what I'd suggest is a record number of add-ons in terms of it being around about 21 million, isn't it? So we could be an 85 million pound player at some stage in his Liverpool career. So the confidence is obviously there, but they need him to basically show no signs of getting used to Premier League football or anything. He needs to kind of hit the ground at some pace straight away. But other than that, I'm not too worried over Liverpool leaving themselves short or anything like that. They've got someone in Carvalho Ramsay who they feel is someone who can give some rest to Trent Alexander-Arnold when needed. They've obviously had Nico Williams there, but I'd suggest when James Milner's getting the game ahead of him in certain Premier League games last season, that the trust wasn't fully in Nico Williams. So Ramsay, we'll obviously see him in the League Cup games and the FA Cup games, and we'll see how he gets on. And I think the big question mark is, the exciting one really is Fabio Carvalho. I don't think there's going to be too much pressure on him to come through and deliver in the same way that there will be on Nunez. So I think it's going to be a case of seeing what he can do, seeing where he's best, whether he's a number 8, a number 10, whether he can play in the wide positions. At the age of 19, I'd suggest there's plenty there for him to develop his game and improve, certainly under a coaching staff that Klopp has got there, at his disposal. So generally, I think Liverpool are okay. They went so close to within, an unprecedented quadruple last season. Okay, ultimately they've come up short in the Premier League and the Champions League, but such are the fine margins of the game at that level that it's no disgrace and there's no suggestion that it was a failure or anything like that. So I think Liverpool are fine, really. Obviously, they've been moaning over the mythical midfielder will go on, but I think Liverpool, they've earned the trust of the supporters over the last 5 or 6 years. Certainly in the Michael Edwards era and in the Klopp era. So, I think they'll go into the season in fine fettle. And I think just looking at other teams as well, it's, new signings doesn't equate to strengthening. There's always this idea that strengthening is just a byword now for buying players, isn't it? In the same way that ambition is. If the club aren't showing any ambition, well, they're trying to win every single trophy available to them. So if that's not ambition, then what is? We'll see. But it does look as though they are done and dusted unless something sensational presents itself between now and the end of August. But, that's still, 6 to 8 weeks away. So we'll see.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Fabio Carvalho could be one that surprises a few people as well, and maybe has a bit of a bigger role this season than what a few people are possibly thinking. But talking of new recruits, Keifer, your first time on Blood Red, not being at the Echo permanently for long, but in terms of the new players that Gorsty's gone through there, obviously Nunez, Carvalho, Ramsay, how excited are you to see them, obviously, with pre-season just on Monday, just a couple of days away now? We're going to start to see these players in Red's kit, at least, if not shirts, for the first few weeks.
Yeah, 100%. I think, towards the back of last season, I think everyone was, gagging for pre-season or the off-season, sorry. And, I think, the toll of the season, of that 63-game season was taken, even supporters, I think we all felt it. There was a game every 2 or 3 days and it just got a bit relentless. But then, as soon as you kind of get a week of that break out of the way, you want the football back, don't you? And you want the pre-season back. You want to see the new signings in the new kit and everything. So, I think, it's a really exciting time, and I think you touched on it there, Matt. I think Carvalho's kind of gone under the radar quite a bit. I think that's personally one that excites me. I think you only have to look at, the numbers he pulled up in the Championship last season. I think, he got near to 20 goal contributions for a 19-year-old to rack up those minutes. And, he played in the back end of Fulham's Premier League season, didn't he, the other season? He scored a couple of goals, I think, got a couple of minutes under his belt. So I think he's a player maybe that doesn't generate the excitement that it should. Maybe that's because, a deal came so close in January. So I think people maybe expected Liverpool to get it done. But yeah, I think as Gorst said, there's a few positions that he could play, and Liverpool can have fun experimenting with him. I think it's kind of similar to Harvey Elliott last season when he came back from Blackburn. I think, I don't think anyone expected him to be starting the game against Chelsea at Anfield that he did, 3 weeks into the season as a centre midfielder, having been out on the right at Blackburn. So, it's exciting to kind of see what steps he'll take under Klopp. And, I'm sure Liverpool will be going for all the trophies again. So there'll be plenty of football to be dished out. And then again, it's a similar one. I think obviously Nunez is the one that gets the headlines, and rightfully so. Obviously, it's a significant signing, and I think, Jurgen Klopp's era, isn't it? It's, it's a changing kind of the guard, isn't it? A change of formation. He might go back to that 4-2-3-1, but even if he doesn't, you'd think it would. It's a signing that if Liverpool get it right, it's the next 7-8 years of their front line. Similar to kind of what they've had with Firmino in terms of just having that mainstay, and then whoever either side of him. But I mean, you'd expect him to hit the ground running. I think you get confidence from the way Diaz did in the mid-season in January, but. Yeah, I mean, it's even Carvalho Ramsay. I mean, you don't know how much football he'll play next season, but that's another one that's exciting. I think you only have to look at the impact that Kostas Tsimikas had. That kind of elevated Robertson's game to the next level, didn't it? Because those two never really got a break, and when they did, the drop off in kind of Liverpool's attacking play was fairly noticeable, wasn't it? So I think you only have to look at players the likes of Marcus Rashford and Dele Alli, who have maybe burnt out in their mid-20s, and I think obviously Liverpool are looking to avoid that with Trent Alexander-Arnold. So if you can kind of bed young Carvalho Ramsay in this season, it's and if you get it right, I think he'd have potential to be a homegrown player by the time he'd be 21. Same with Carvalho, obviously he's already is one. So it's plenty of exciting additions for the future, not just now. So even if they don't come in and play 30 games a season, it's looking at the next 2, 3, 4 years where I'm sure the business will be proven to be value for money.
Yeah, absolutely. Got complete trust, haven't we, all these days in terms of what Liverpool do, the future planning and all of that kind of stuff. But I suppose that the one question that we keep seeing, Charlotte, Gorst, you mentioned it before, lots of fans wanting a midfielder this summer. What are your thoughts on that position? Is that something that concerns you at all, or do you just sort of have the trust that if Liverpool say they don't need one, then they probably don't?
Well, I mean, the fan in me is like, yeah, Liverpool need a midfielder, but like Ghosty said, the trust it's been earned. So it's a bit like the Van Dijk situation that summer 2017 when Liverpool wanted a centre half and it was clear who they wanted, but it was a case of could they get him at that time, and then obviously all that kicked off. So Liverpool didn't sign a centre half, and it was more. I mean, they paid for it in that part of the season, some shocking defending, but then obviously they got the man and. Look what's happened since then. So we all know Jurgen Klopp waits for his target, and I think we all kind of know who the target is. But it's evident that Liverpool are looking for a certain type of midfielder because they were linked with Tchouameni, who went to Real Madrid. So I think they're looking for that profile of a young, powerful midfielder who can get box to box basically, and is different to what they've got now. And like Steven Gerrard said after the Champions League final, they do need someone who can burst into the box and grab a goal, someone who offers something different to what the side do now. Because like Thiago, he's fantastic, but he's got a certain skill set, and that's probably one thing he does lack, his goals. So I think just evolving as a team, really. Look at City, where they're different to Liverpool in the sense that they don't really have a forward who's going to, I mean, they might do now, but they don't really have a forward who is going to go score 20 plus goals consistently like Salah does at Liverpool, like Mane did. they relied on De Bruyne, score goals for him, and Liverpool don't really have anyone like that. And he's the best in the world as a midfielder in that position. So, yeah, it's just, I feel like it will take Liverpool to another level, but it's about finding the right man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for the time being, Gorst, I think it's probably fair to say maybe contracts will become a bit more of an important thing for Julian Ward and Liverpool to look at rather than incoming transfers. Obviously, 5 players now into the last year of the deals. Obviously, Milner's included in that, but Keifer, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Firmino, and obviously Mohamed Salah as well. Not all of them will sign, and usually when you're into the last 12 months of a deal, that usually only ends up in one way, really, that they end up leaving. But I mean, Liverpool can't afford to lose all 5 of those on a free. Something has to change there, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, Salah is the kind of outlier one there, isn't he? Everyone knows that Liverpool want him and he'd like to stay, and it's just a question of whether they can crunch the numbers and get him tied down. With the others, I imagine Oxlade-Chamberlain, I think he'll stay this summer and he'll just, leave on a free transfer with the well wishes of everyone in the kind of same way that, Origi has and Wijnaldum has as well in the last couple of years. There's no point selling Oxlade-Chamberlain now if you're not going to be bringing in a replacement midfielder and you're not going to be getting kind of equivalent money to the sort of player who Liverpool will be looking to bring in. So for me, I see no problem with him staying this summer. It's more valuable to Liverpool playing in the cup competitions and providing squad depth than he is leaving, for what, 10 million? Doesn't get you anyone these days, does it? So, I think he'll stay. For me, for me is an interesting one. I couldn't really hazard a guess as to what would happen with him. There's a scenario where he leaves in the same way that Wijnaldum has and Origi has, with huge emotional kind of final day at Anfield, and everyone waves him off and wishes him the best. But then there's also a scenario where he just quietly signs a new deal midway through next season. It's I couldn't really hazard a guess as to which way that one pans out, to be honest, particularly with the options that Liverpool have got. You look at it now, you'd probably say that he's probably 5th, isn't he? 5th choice out of the 5. I think Jota's certainly ahead of him. Diaz is. And Nunez coming in for that price tag, you'd imagine that he will be as well. So an interesting one on Firmino. Keifer, I think Liverpool are keen to get him tied down to a new deal. I think that might just be one that just gets sorted at some stage in the next couple of months. And then Joe Gomez is not in the final year of his contract, but I think he's another one who Liverpool are looking to tie down as well. So, contract work to be done. It always seems to be the case at Liverpool these days, doesn't it? That they've got plenty of contracts to sort out. But the biggest one is still got that huge question mark over it in Mohamed Salah, and we talked about it till we're blue in the face, and still no nearer to a resolution from the outside looking in. So I guess we'll have to just watch this space.
Yeah, the Mohamed Salah one, Keifer, is always going to be one that we talk about until we get a decision one way or the other in terms of what's definitively going to happen with that. But like I said before, there's quite a list of these players. It's unusual for a club to be in this position of having so many decisions to make. I mean, how many of the 5 do you think you could lose realistically on a free transfer, or how many? I suppose a better question would be how many in an ideal world would Liverpool get rid of?
I'll flip it the other way. How many do Liverpool keep? I think they'd keep obviously Keifer in an ideal world. Obviously, as Gorst said, you'd imagine that's probably got no hiccups in it, or certainly nothing compared to the Salah saga they've kind of endured over the last 18 months to 2 years. Obviously, Salah, you'd like him to tie himself down. Firmino, as Gorst said, it's a difficult one because obviously there's pros and cons. I think if Liverpool go back to, if Klopp goes back to a change of system, a 4-2-3-1, there's talk that maybe reinvent himself, so to speak. We saw him play that role a couple of times during the last few years, and he's done it well. Obviously, it's far less running than kind of what he's been used to. So maybe that kind of suits him at this stage of his career. So you could make an argument to say he'd be worth keeping around in some kind of role, and even like a mentorship role kind of thing. I'm sure he's in no rush to leave Liverpool, and I'm sure as we've seen with James Milner, those kind of people stay around and pick up trophies and pick up appearances. Especially now having won the cup double last season, there's now a genuine argument to offer 20 games a season, even if you're not in the first 11. So I think that's one that you could make an argument for. Milner, obviously, you'd imagine he'd go. You'd hope he'd stay around in some capacity, but obviously it depends kind of what his future plans are. And then, as Gorst says, OxladeChamberlain, there's no point Liverpool getting rid of him for the kind of fee that's been talked around this summer. Especially if he's going to go to a team that's maybe a top 6 team, say to speak. I think. I know there was some wild rumours about United being interested, but you'd just be weakening your hand to strengthen a rival's hand, and as Gorst said, you can't buy anything for 10 million these days. So I think his versatility, as we saw during AFCON, is worth its weight in gold at times for Liverpool. They'll be well aware after what happened the other year in regards to the centre halves that it only takes a couple of freak injuries over a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden your season can be unravelling before you. So yeah, I think keeping him around is certainly a good thing. But the Salah one obviously is the big one, but I think 9 times out of 10 when a player of that kind of calibre does enter the last 12 months of their contract, you only have to look at Paul Pogba, what's happened. That's kind of that dragged on for a similar amount of time, didn't it, to Salah? There was rumblings, even 2 years ago, whether he'd sign a new deal at United and whatever. And obviously their kind of management of contracts has been pretty woeful in recent years, but still, when it's a contract of that size and it's still not resolved, and obviously you add in that he can start speaking to clubs in Europe from the 1st of January, I believe. So it doesn't look good, but you'd hope that something can kind of be resolved.
Yeah, the 1st of January is probably the date that worries people, isn't it, Charlotte, in terms of Salah? The clock keeps ticking, the days keep counting down. The closer we get to that point, the more concern and worry there'll be, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely, because you'd think that every top club in Europe is going to be talking to him. So, I mean, you'd be surprised if his agent hasn't already been talking to clubs at this stage. But yeah, like when it gets to January, you like PSG, Barcelona, Real Madrid, whoever wants to outside the Premier League can start making offers to him, and I don't know. You soon find out, don't you, if an offer's been made, and then performance dips a little bit, and everyone's like, "Oh, well, his head's not in it," and all that sort of stuff. So that's the problem this season. I mean, I have no doubt about it that Salah's an ultimate professional, and he'll know himself now whether he's going to stay at Liverpool or not, I guess. So it's not a case of whether he's going to be at his best next season, because he's a pro. He loves breaking records. He loves scoring goals, and he loves Liverpool. So you feel like he's going to, whether it is his last season or not, he's going to give his all for the club.
You wrote something in the last day or two, Gorsty, around Mohamed Salah and what it might mean for the future. And I think you were spot on in terms of what it means for next season. Mohamed Salah isn't going to go anywhere, and you'd expect that it could actually work in Liverpool's favour to some extent.
Yeah, I just think last summer when he was there with Liverpool for the full pre-season, I think that was reflected in his performances for the first half of that season. I think, thinking back 24 hours to when I was writing it, I think he scored 8 goals from when he returned from the Africa Cup of Nations, and he scored 31 in total. So, the more than the lion's share of his goals came during that period when you were having that conversation almost weekly, weren't you? Mohamed Salah, is he the best player in the world? Probably yes, and you're having that debate. So I just think if he's got another full pre-season behind him this summer, with maybe a little bit of the disappointments of the last week of last season still lingering, and he feels as though he's still got a little bit of something to chase down and respond to, and he's got a little bit of a point to prove. Not that I personally think he has a point to prove, but I just think the character that he is, he might just feel as though he wants to kind of avenge the disappointments of missing out on the Premier League and the Champions League. And then, of course, the contract situation lingering in the back burner, where he thinks that I'm going to show the owners of this club that I'm worth the money that I'm asking for. And I think all that might just be a perfect storm, and it might be to Liverpool's benefit. So you might just see Mohamed Salah completely fly out of the traps, and you're looking at it before the World Cup starts in November. He's once again far away the Premier League's best player, and Liverpool are right in the thick of it because of what he's able to do. So, I think the next 3-4 months for Mohamed Salah are going to be quite big, actually. I think he's going to be really, really on top form.
Yeah, certainly a lot for Liverpool to think about. Could be an interesting few weeks, and hopefully there is something of a shift in that Mohamed Salah saga as well. But let's move on to some questions then that listeners have been submitting. Don't forget, of course, as well, that you can get in touch with us on emails at bloodred@reachplc.com. Send all of your questions there. We'll try and get to those as regularly as we can as the season progresses. Keifer, I'll throw the first question over to you. It comes from Cyan Roy, who says it's a bit of a long question, but Liverpool have sort of signed players, I suppose, that have kind of impressed against them in the Champions League in the past. You think of Darwin Nunez and Luis Diaz, I imagine, are the two that he's talking about there. How much is that a coincidence, and how much do those performances come into the thinking with Liverpool? Is it more about analytics? Is it more about that? Is it a mixture of all three of those things? And I suppose, does that vary from player to player? What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? I mean, the three that I can think of off the top of my head is obviously Minamino is probably his best Anfield performance came against Liverpool, as harsh as it sounds to say. Obviously, Diaz and obviously Nunez, obviously more recently, but I don't think that would necessarily. I don't think Liverpool are that kind of ad hoc that they turn around and after a good performance be, wanting to sign a player. I'm sure there'd be, we know how much groundwork goes into a player in terms of the personality, away from the pitch kind of thing. So I don't think that's necessarily something you can mask by a good 90-minute performance kind of thing, because you can see how many times in the Champions League you'll get players who kind of turn up and then maybe they get a big move and they probably don't kind of reach those heights once again. I mean, I remember there was a story around the time of Minamino when he signed. There was, I think, a few of the players came to Klopp, didn't they, and basically said, we've got to sign this, player. He's kind of run rings around us in both games. So I'm sure that might have a part. If players are players themselves are coming up to the managing staff, but we know it's a lengthy process, and obviously, in the case of Nunez, we know that it's not been something that has been triggered from April onwards. We know Liverpool. Well, it's kind of been reported, isn't it, that Liverpool have been tracking him for a number of years, as I think the Under-20 World Cup was kind of earmarked as a start point, back in his time in Uruguay. So, it is an interesting one. Over the course of the season, you are going to get obviously people who kind of up their game against Liverpool and that kind of thing. But no, I wouldn't say Liverpool are that erratic kind of thing. I'm sure I'd like to think there's more that goes on behind the scenes than just a good 90-minute performance. But obviously it certainly helps, doesn't it? I think as fans as well, if a player's played well against you, it certainly whets the appetite a bit, doesn't it, ahead of them signing. I think I think Nunez, I think everyone walked away from Anfield that night and was like, whoever kind of ties this kid down to a deal over the summer, I think he's going to do well. But then on the flip side, I don't think Diaz pulled up. I don't think it's harsh to say he didn't pull up too many trees when he played against Liverpool. I don't think I was coming away from the game thinking, if I had to sign one player, it would be him. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that there's obviously more extensive research that goes into a signing.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of analytics that the recruitment team look into and all the rest of it, Charlotte. They do, as Keifer says, track these players for a long time. But I suppose with Darwin Nunez, if Virgil van Dijk, for example, had come in at the end of that game and expressed how much of a difficult player he was to play against, it's probably not the worst thing in the world to have a decent performance against Liverpool to just make that case and put yourself at the forefront of their thinking.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's kind of like Keith said, Liverpool have been tracking Nunez for years, but then it's kind of like an audition, isn't it? Play against Liverpool in 2 games. Let's see what you've got up against the best centre-half in the world. And Van Dijk mentioned Nunez on Rio Ferdinand's Behind the Lines. He does BT Sports, so about the hardest strikers he's faced, and mentioned Nunez the same ilk as Haaland. And obviously Haaland's got this big reputation, and rightly so. He's a great finisher, great player. But you see Nunez is a similar type of player, strong, fast finisher. So yeah, if you're getting a glowing review of someone like Van Dijk, who rarely gets troubled from strikers, you're onto a good thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the next question then, Gorst. The AK London asks, just wanted to ask if a 3-4-3 formation could ever suit Liverpool, giving Trent and Robertson much more freedom in attack. That is all, he says. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. It's Have Liverpool ever played with three at the back with Jurgen Klopp? I think they did it at Brighton maybe one year.
Wijnaldum played it in the back, didn't he?
Yeah. And to be fair, I think that was one of the performances of that season. I seem to remember Coutinho absolutely running amok, and Salah and Firmino were at it as well. It's an interesting one, yeah. Certainly, they've got you're picking four from that three. You're picking three from that four. It's there's no real weak link in that back line. If you're picking a Matip, Konate, and Van Dijk, say, and I still think Joe Gomez is a fabulous centre half when he's fit and firing as well. So that is an interesting one. The only perhaps question is how much impact that has on the fullbacks. Now, in a 3-4-3, you'd think that it would enable them to get forward a little bit more, but Trent Alexander-Arnold is a fullback in name only, isn't he? He's more of a kind of infield right centre mid these days, certainly last season anyway. So it's how much of an impact that would have on his ability to play that way. And Liverpool have got to do their absolute most to maximise him and his ability, because he's the most creative player, isn't he? But it's certainly, I'd like to see it in a friendly for a half or something, maybe just to kind of see how it develops. And I think there is scope for Liverpool to kind of change things up. We know that it's been 4-3-3 for years, hasn't it? But there's the potential for a 4-2-3-1 now, more so than there was perhaps without a focal point like Nunez leading the line. Never really seems to work too much for Liverpool under Klopp. I think it worked quite well at the Etihad for 40 minutes one year, and then City kind of got the measure of them and it ended up being a 1-1 draw. Seems to remember them going there at Brentford when they were looking for a winner, and players were just getting in each other's way at certain points. But with the full benefits of a pre-season schedule and the idea of staying unpredictable, as Pep Linders says, then yeah, maybe 3-4-3 could be looked at, and I'm sure 4-2-3-1 will as well.
The 4-2-3-1 is interesting for me, Keifer, in terms of we've seen Liverpool sort of do it in bits and pieces, like Gorst said. They've never really kind of started with it, but if they needed a goal, I think they did it against, was it Wolves, when they needed to get that late winner, they kind of do it reactively. Do you think maybe that's a more likely way that we see a bit more of it than maybe starting with a 4-2-3-1? It might be that games are finished like that. I suppose that the 5 subs thing maybe plays into that as well, that you've got yourself in the Premier League an extra couple of opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. That obviously, like, everyone's pointing towards the signing of Nunez as kind of the big change, aren't they? In terms of, I'm sure he would work in a 4-3-3 as well, but it's just playing off the shoulder, where he isn't having to do kind of the unselfish part that Firmino does. He's obviously someone who's going to peel off the shoulder, as we saw against Liverpool, and obviously a 4-2-3-1, given Klopp's history, is probably something that suits that. I mean, you only have to look at what he did to Lewandowski in that formation and kind of the rewards he had with that. Even Aubameyang later on in his days at Dortmund. But you'd think with a full pre-season, Liverpool have kind of got a 4-3-3 kind of under their hat, haven't they? They know how to use it. So you'd think they'd maybe focus on using a 4-2-3-1 if that was the case. I think the comments from Ancelotti after the Champions League final were pretty telling, weren't they? In terms of, he said that Liverpool were arguably the easiest team out of the run they had with City, Chelsea and us, in terms of, who to prepare for, because of, how notorious Liverpool's 4-3-3 is. And arguably sometimes it's not a weakness. I don't think it's a weakness now, but at times I think during the early days it had been one that there wasn't a plan B. So obviously that's something they'll have now, and obviously if they can kind of hone their skills in a 4-2-3-1, it's only going to benefit them, because, as you say, the in-game switches at times, towards the latter end of the last season, it did work, but as Gorst says, at Brentford and kind of games earlier on in the season when they were chasing goals, like West Ham, I think as well, it was all very chaotic, and there didn't seem to be much understanding of what was going on. But I mean, he did play it in his earlier days, didn't he? And I think at Liverpool, then obviously when Coutinho was there, when they had the 4 for a brief period of time, there was occasionally something like that. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes, because you'd think on paper, as kind of you take Liverpool into a new era, that is the go-to. But yeah, Pep Linders is obviously a big fan of staying unpredictable, adding different dimensions. We've seen that with Trent last season, kind of going more infield. I think it wouldn't it wouldn't harm them to add an extra layer to that unpredictability over the next kind of 6 weeks before the season starts.
Yeah, certainly be interesting to see what they do in pre-season. I'm sure if we start seeing it a bit more, that might be a fairly strong hint that we'll see it during the season as well. But let's finish then with a kind of non-specific to Liverpool question, really. Matt Snyman simply asks, who is the best player to have played the beautiful game? So we'll go through each of you. You'll give us an answer. I'm pretty sure that we're going to all say the same thing, actually. But Charlotte, I'll come to you first. Is your answer by any chance Lionel Messi?
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah. No one's better than Messi. Like what they've done. I mean, no, there's just no comparison, I don't think.
Gorsty, any other shouts, or is it Messi as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously Messi being the 6-time Ballon d'Or winner, is he 7-time? You'd be hard pushed to argue against, or argue the case for anyone else other than him. I'm just trying to think of potential like left field shouts, and the original Ronaldo was always one of my favourites growing up. Ronaldinho was my absolute all-time favourite player, just for the joy that he brought and the big smile on his face, and he was doing passes off his back and doing all kinds of tricks that you'd only ever seen on on the PlayStation, and they were working. And for a good few 2, 3, 4 years, he was undoubtedly the best player in the world. But yeah, it has to be Messi, doesn't it? What he's done over the last 15 years or so now, it will probably never be matched.
Yeah, certainly my answer. Keifer, a full house for Messi, or any other shout?
Yeah, undisputably Messi, but I'm going to go similar to Gorst, a bit left fielder. I'm going to go Zidane if you take Messi away from it. I mean, obviously a bit before my time, but when you kind of watch all the clips back and all the kind of DVDs and everything, and obviously the highlight reels, he's just the complete midfielder, isn't he? I mean, to have the confidence, shall we say, to kind of dink a penalty in a World Cup final, I think that tells you everything you need to know about a player. But yeah, he's just a different breed, wasn't he? And you think he would have, in his peak, he would have got into any team in world football, and he's one of those. I think you could put him into any generation of football, and he'd be able to adapt, kind of thing. And I think that's just a testimony to how good he was. But yeah, if that's obviously in place of Messi, but Messi is my number one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that will just about do us then for today's podcast. Plenty more Liverpool content to come over the weekend. The Blood Red podcast, of course, back on Monday as well, when Liverpool are back in pre-season, and we'll get that first glimpse potentially of Nunez, Carvalho, Ramsay and the rest of that red squad over the course of the next few weeks. For now, though, thank you for listening. Thanks for your questions as well. Do keep submitting those. But for now, it's goodbye.